Good morning. I'm going to bring up the slides in a second, the agenda, and then we'll just sort of do the attendance. Go with me. All right, great. I may have a little difficulty seeing the hand raising, so folks that want to say something, just again, given this fairly small meeting, day before a holiday weekend, just go for it if you want to speak. So this is the kind of regular meeting of P21 Data Governing Board for July 2nd. We have some special guests, some of whom are in the lobby. There's Trina. And despite the small attendance, we have an exciting agenda to go through, so I will kick it off. I'll see if there is anyone for the public comment. I don't see anyone that's obviously waiting for public comment, but is there anyone, members of the public, that wants to add comments in today's meeting? All right, hearing nothing. We're going to do the attendance and then one introduction, and I will start off with the new introduction for a new member of the Data Governing Board. Lauren, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, but as probably folks know, Floyd Blanchard at UConn had been the Data Governing Board rep. He was promoted to interim CFO at UConn and has thus stepped off his role at the Data Governing Board, and his shoes will be very ably filled by Lauren Jorgensen, who I think many people probably already know. But Lauren, do you want to say hi, kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll do the roll call for everyone else.
Sure. I'm Lauren Jorgensen. I'm the Director of Institutional Research at UConn. I've been at UConn for over 24 years now in institutional research. I had done some P20 work a long time ago as far as data sets, and I still work closely with our data warehouse team on the P20 requests coming in if they have questions and things like that. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
We are grateful you can make it. So I'll do the roll call just to check attendance, and then we have again a couple outside guests, and I think we'll do the introductions for them during the individual presentations. That works. So just to go through, as we are still sort of in a state waiting to add the new agencies to it, we'll go through the existing agencies for this. Did I see you on the screen? So Maura, I know Jen is not here. Maura, you're standing in for Jen today.
Yes.
Okay, great. Jan.
Yep.
CSCU. Patrick, DOL.
I'm here. I'm here.
All right. And then, Rachel is out from OEC today, and I do not see anyone from State Department of Education. Again, since it's a small group, if we the other sort of new agencies coming on, Susan and Trina, if you want to say hi and introduce yourselves, particularly to Lauren, who I believe probably does not know you, that would be wonderful. And then I know we have Kathy and Lori also from Department of Labor. Oh, there's Susan. Okay.
Yep. Hi, Lauren. I'm Susan Smith, and I am the Director of Business Intelligence and Analytics for the Department of Social Services.
Good morning, Trina Mazzata, Bureau Chief of Strategic Planning at DCF. Nice to meet you.
All right. And then I think, Lauren, just for the context, so DCF and DSS are not official members of P21 yet, but they will be very soon once we sign a new set of agreements. And so they and a couple of other new agencies will join. We had, again, because of the holiday weekend, Office of Higher Ed and Coalition to End Homelessness could not make it today. So we're a little shorthanded, but you have a wonderful, talented group of peers to work with in this new venture. So thank you and welcome. Click, where do we go? So one of the things we wanted to cover was changes from the legislative session. Because there were legislative changes directly related to P20 and then sort of indirectly related to some of the data that's collected that could be part of P20 requests in the future. And so we have asked Mohit Agrawal, the Deputy Policy Director in the Office of the Governor, to come and give us a legislative update. Mohit, I'm going to yield the floor. Do you want to just give a brief introduction for anyone that does not know you?
Yeah.
And then I can click through the slides. Just tell me when to go.
Okay, perfect. Can anyone hear me well? I'm using a new headphone setup. So. Okay.
It's a little choppy.
Thanks, God, for that. Sorry, go ahead.
It sounds a little choppy, but just keep going and we'll see if it gets
That's a little choppy.
better or worse.
I can switch. Well, thanks for just more generally about the work that's going on and what will happen around P20 win. So P20 win is central to the governor's interest in using data effectively to govern the P20 win. Authorities, just a second.
Pause. The sound is pretty bad for me. I don't know if it's bad for others.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
nearly impossible. Sorry.
I can, Mohit, if you want to reorient, I can either flip to the next thing in the agenda, or if you want to, okay, you got plan B ready. All right, let's see.
Okay, is this better?
Much better. All right.
Okay, we will use that. All right, so I'll start from the top again. Thanks, folks, for inviting me this morning. Very excited to present the next few slides, but also just more generally to, help this group move forward. P20 win is really quite central to the governor's mission in using data effectively to improve governance. There's a broadened statutory authority for P20 win that I'll talk about in just a second, and that authority, really keys into what it is that we and the governor's office really think of P20 win as being able to do. So, just big picture, this is a group, and these are the agencies that we think really are in a good place to get data merged together, to use data to inform outcomes and improve policy and people's lives in the state that are using those outcomes. So let's click to the next slide and let's get into some of these legislative updates. So this session, big picture, the governor proposed, and actually everything I believe that I'll be talking about came out of a governor's bill. So the governor proposed two bills at the beginning of the session that were related to P20 win. One bill was Senate Bill 881 and the other one 885. 881 was a workforce development bill and 885 was an implementer. And there are pieces of both that were that would have impacted, that will impact, because they both passed in some form, the P20 win system. So, and so let me just contextualize what those bills were. So, both of those bills were driven by an understanding from the governor that workforce development is critical. The governor's work on workforce development started pre-COVID. We really started hitting it hard the summer after the first legislative session in 2019. That aside, there's no question that workforce development has become even more important during COVID and trying to manage the economic recovery at this moment. So, and the budget and the implementer, provide significant funds for workforce development. So there definitely is an angle here on workforce development, but the changes that are in the bill are actually broader, and they can help us understand different kinds of programs and different kinds of outcomes. And so even though a lot of this was being driven by workforce development, that isn't necessarily the only place or sometimes even the best place for us to go with some of these new data tools and responsibilities. So with that context, let me just dig into what happened. So the key bill that passed here, so both 881 and 885 were rolled up into Senate Bill 1202. So that is the implementer that passed on, I believe, June 17th. And so major portions of the implementer are relevant to workforce development. And then within those sections, there are really key provisions on data governance, on P20 win. And so I want to pull those out and talk about those. So I'm going to start with section 284 of Senate Bill 1202. So 284 is an amendment that directly amends the underlying authority of P20 win. So 10A-57G is the Connecticut General Statute that establishes P20 win, or I believe it's called CP20 win in the statutes. And effective as of yesterday, these are changes that have gone into effect. So one, the P20 WIN Executive Board has been reconstituted. Every leader of a participating agency, the Chief Workforce Officer, who is the director of the new Office of Workforce Strategy, which is a new state agency under statute, and the Secretary of OPM, or his or her designee, are now the members of the P20 WIN Executive Board. So that's one change that I presume is not going to cause significant turmoil in any way, but just letting everyone know that that the board structure has changed in that way. The second bullet point there on EMOUs. So we're moving away from using MOAs and moving toward the EMOUs, and the statute reflects that. So the statute defines an EMOU and then explicitly says that agencies that enter into an EMOU are then considered participating agencies into P20 WIN. So hopefully that's good news for DSS, DCF, and DPH here on the call. Third bullet here is that, as I mentioned earlier, P20 WIN's statute now establishes a broader authority for what P20 WIN is supposed to be doing, and that is supposed to be informing policy and practice for education, workforce, and supported services. So that is a broader remit than before. I would have to look at what it was before, but I think it was a little bit more in the education workforce angle. And so there's definitely this, intentionality from the governor's office that we have these, this broader remit in mind. And frankly, I would not consider this remit to be, I would want to read this remit in as broad a manner as possible, right? And so to Gen work, if there's a state service that is provided that helps improve outcomes in workforce, and that service, is something that we should be looking at in P20 WIN, even if it is outside of the educational workforce space, and and maybe potentially not even considered a supported service. So I can't think of a good example right off the top of my head, but no, here's one. There's a new program in the implementer that allows training providers to contract with the Department of Transportation for transit passes for their students, right? And so that is not directly an education program or a workforce program. It may be considered supported service in some way, but it's a Department of Transportation program, right? But if we do an evaluation and find that program is complementary and supports outcomes in other programs, then that is something that P20 WIN could be very useful for. So just trying to put an example on the table of how broad we can read that third bullet point. And then lastly, on the last bullet point here, so OWS is Chief Workforce Officer. So so the Office of Workforce Strategy was legislatively established in the implementer. The Chief Workforce Officer is the person who leads the Office of Workforce Strategy. So that individual, in consultation with the Chief Data Officer and the Labor Commissioner, may submit annually to CP20 WIN a request for data and analysis regarding the state's workforce system. And so, that's obviously a very specific a requirement, but rather an authority or permission for the Chief Workforce Officer. But I think that is something that we can all kind of think of more broadly as, what is it that we're doing in the state that is supporting workforce outcomes? And like I said just a second ago, those things don't necessarily have to be directly in the education or workforce space. Any questions on this? 10A-57G is really the core of the changes happening directly to P20 WIN. So just want to make sure everyone here understands what those changes are.
Where is the Office of Workforce Strategy located?
Physically in 450 Columbus. Institutionally is an APO to the governor's office, so it is an unusual APO structure. And the governor's office, as folks may realize, does not necessarily have the most robust back office because we don't contract for millions of dollars of services. So so we're still working through some of the details around some of the back office support to the Office of Workforce Strategy. But statutorily, Office of Workforce Strategy is an agency, and that agency is supported by the governor's office through an APO for administrative purposes only. What?
Want me to move forward?
Yeah. Perfect. So given the folks on this call, I thought it'd be helpful to click pretty quickly through some of the new data sets or data elements that are going to be collected in state government. Again, these were in the implementer. And then I'll mention a couple two more things at the bottom there. So there are three somewhat significant, somewhat important new forms of data collection going into effect at various points over the next couple of years. So credential records, section 298 of the implementer. So this will be a new data program led by the Office of Higher Education. And it is a replacement for existing requirements that are currently on the books for certain kinds of regulated higher ed entities, whether that includes the private universities in the state, that includes the POSAs, the professional occupational schools in the state. So, so those institutions will now be reporting in a systematized fashion into this database, as opposed to sending in paper forms every so often. And the credential record will be set up in a way, will be set up using a standardized format based on the credential engine or organization. So they are a national nonprofit. They work with a number of states that have set up definitions and a database structure that many states now are actually using for this purpose, including New Jersey, Indiana, most of New England, et cetera. And so we're adopting this credential record. It should provide more simplicity and easier access to understanding what programs are offered in Connecticut and what the underlying skills are that are being taught in these programs. So that's a credential record. POSA student records, so professional occupational students. So these are programs like welding, CDL programs, so truck driving, includes cosmetology and hairdressing. So it's the world of students who are getting training so that they can go on and get some kind of certification from from the state. And that's an area that, so those are programs that are overseen, they're regulated by the Office of Higher Education. However, the student records are not being tracked in any systematic way. So there's no EdSite, there's no SDE tracking of student records. And frankly, unlike what we have with our higher ed partners, some of whom are on the line here, we don't have good data sharing practices, and we don't have a P20 relationship with these institutions. And so the Office of Higher Education will be creating a database that will be that the statute requires that these occupational schools then submit certain student records to. And so over time, we'll be able to actually track who are the students in these programs, are they graduating, what are their outcomes, are they working in fields that are aligned to the occupation that they've been trained for, et cetera. And so so it's a pretty important step forward. Hopefully it's not a burden on anyone here, but it's an important step forward for us to be able to assess outcomes for private occupational schools. And the last thing here is the enhanced wage record. This is huge, frankly. This is a big one for the state. Kudos to the DOL folks on the line, including Patrick, for helping get this over the finish line. So the enhanced wage record, which will go into effect in 2024, requires, I believe, the final count is 17 additional data fields to be submitted quarterly to the Department of Labor by any employer who is otherwise required to submit into the wage records. So moving forward, then the state of Connecticut will have an understanding about gender pay gaps, racial pay gaps. Those are both fields that will be collected. We'll have a better understanding of the actual work being done within each of these occupational jobs, because we'll be collecting the SOC, the standardized occupational code for each employee in the state of Connecticut. And so the enhanced wage record will really now, having this additional data field will let us understand the labor markets and the workforce in a way that we've never been able to before, and no other state in the country frankly has. And so it is a huge win for the state, and I really can't wait for that section to go into effect and for that data to start coming in. That section, a lot of this was developed in collaboration with the regulated entities, including the enhanced wage records. And so there certainly is an intentionality here that there's a consensus that we need to collect this data because we need to use data to make better decisions and better outcomes happen. I will stay on guard to make sure that the enhanced wage record is something that is followed through once that comes to fruition, and once businesses realize what they have to do. So just putting that out there for everyone to watch how that develops over the next couple of years. All right, section 305. Is a new section that regulates data sharing agreements between state agencies who have data and outside entities. And it only applies, as written in this bill, it only applies to these three well, actually the 4 and the last one, 306, but it only applies to the things you see on this page, right? So this section does not apply more generally to any data sharing agreements that may be in place or that other agencies enter into, and that's as a practice, and that's fine. However, I would recommend look at section 305 as a framework for what the legislature believes data sharing agreements should do. And so I think it becomes a helpful common sense framework that we should try to follow when possible. And I wouldn't be surprised if over time that section is broadened and additional data sharing, if additional agencies are required to follow those requirements. But for now, only data from section 298, 303, 304, and 306 that may be shared by an agency with an outside entity. Only those data then have to, only those data sharing agreements would have to adhere to these requirements. And then lastly is section 306, which I think is exciting for this group, which is that 12-15, which is the privacy statute for DRS, has been amended to explicitly allow for the participation of P20 WIN and for them to share data in response to P20 data request. And so DRS now, over time, and once they have the time and energy to join, I think could be a helpful partner to P20 moving forward. I think I had a last slide, Scott, there. One more.
Oh, there.
Perfect. So these are easy. These are repeals, and so certain things have been repealed. The legislative report card that the CETC, the old Governors Workforce Council, was required to create, has been repealed. Not to say that we don't like to put data, out, and we don't like to report these things, but rather that statute was defunct essentially. But the new Office of Workforce Strategy and the new Government Workforce Council need to find ways to provide that information in a format that is easy for us to produce and that is helpful for others to be able to read. CETC reporting on WIOA compliance, that's even the weeds of WIOA 31-11T. And I mentioned a little bit earlier about how we're moving a lot of the credential reporting into this new online database, and so we're removing the other statutes that requires this reporting, so that there's no duplication of reporting to the Office of Higher Education. And then lastly, the HECC, the Higher Education Coordinating Council. I'm not particularly familiar with the history behind this entity. It doesn't seem to have been active in recent years, and so the implementer removes that from statute, and so it's no longer an entity in state government. Okay, I will leave it there. I'm happy to take questions, or we can move on.
Thank you, Mohit. I really appreciate you going through this. So if folks have questions, I think, again, given the number, just go for it and speak out.
I have a quick question. This is Jan. Good to see you. I was wondering if you could illuminate or just mention a couple examples of what the protections are. You said Section 305 requires to adhere to certain protections just for those things. Can you just give an idea of what those are? Thanks.
Absolutely. Good to see you too this morning, Jan. So, okay, so happy to go through it. There's 10 different provisions. I'll summarize a couple of them. So, frankly, they should be very standard. So, one, that an entity that enters into a data sharing agreement shall only use that data for the purposes that the data sharing agreement was entered into for. So that hopefully is pretty straightforward. That only individuals who are on the data sharing agreement can access that data and not anyone else. That data has to be stored in a location that's in the data sharing agreement and can't be copied or moved elsewhere.
Okay.
That there will be procedures for notifying the state agency that provided the data if there is a breach of the agreement.
Okay, you don't. Thank you. I don't want you to take up time. Yeah, I can read it myself. I just wanted to get a general feeling. That gives me a general feeling. I appreciate it. Thank you.
There is one thing I want to mention that it's going to be slightly sticky to work through, which is that subsection B of 305 says that, subsection C says that if you share the data, so if you have exempt data, and again, this only applies to those 4 data sets I mentioned, the 3 new data sets and then any DRS data. But those, if any of those data were to be shared via the sharing agreement, that data with, say, UConn, and UConn is a public entity, UConn is subject to FOI. This provides an FOI shield. So any data that is FOI exempt, that is held within these 3 or 4 different data sets that we talked about, that is then shared with another entity, and that entity is itself not FOIA exempt, like the UConn is not FOIA exempt, then the exemption follows. And that is a new legal construct. FOIA exemptions are not necessarily something that follow the data. It's usually something that lives at the agency level. And so this is a bit of a new legal construct where if the data is considered FOIA exempt because it's person identifiable and you want to protect individuals' privacy, then this allows for that data to be shared in a way that that exemption is not pierced.
Good to know. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Hearing nothing, then oh, there we go.
Actually, no, yeah, I'm just curious about the repeal of of T10-10A-57B. So we rely on the data that the colleges report to OHE right now to run our what we call our education and training connection on our website, and I'm hoping there'll be some way that we can replace that information for our customers. But I'll work with OHE on that. But it's a concern that I have, but.
Patrick, the new, I'll get this right. The credential registry has an advisory group in the statute. And I'm just checking right now before I promise that the labor department is part of it. But I thought so.
Yeah, but I mean,
it is. So
yeah,
I mean, certainly want.
I mean, what we offer though, we offer programs, every program, not just credentials. That's in terms of what we have available right now on our website for the public to access. But anyway, we'll work on that.
The definition of credential here in the registry is quite broad, and so if anything results in a student graduating from a program, whether it's a degree granting program, whether it's a certificate granting program, or neither, whether it just prepares them to apply for an occupational license, like those are all credentials. And so hopefully everything that is currently coming into your office through the 10A-57B statute is still being reported in this new credential registry, and frankly it should be reported in a manner that it's easier to digest because it'll be more systematized.
Okay.
Which agencies are required to be part of P20 WIN?
So the statute only names certain agencies, in part because that's how statutes have been written, and the new agencies were added via at this point it's going to be E-MOUs. So I can certainly pull up the section and tell you which are like the founding agencies, which the statute directly puts into P20 WIN. So that's CSCU, Department of Ed, Labor, OEC, UConn, CCIC, and then OPM. Right, so those are kind of like the founding members that are directly mentioned in the statute, and then additional agencies will have to be added through E-MOU.
Thank you.
I think just to add to Mohit's point, the change, so that list is really what had been in statute until the end of this legislative session. So that's the sort of status quo. And what was added was essentially allow for the expansion voluntarily to other agencies, but to say that essentially we can add new agencies to P20 WIN through this process and through the procedures that are outlined in the agreements that the agencies review and sign on to. No one is required to join it. I guess that's the other point, but it allows for the sort of voluntary expansion to new agencies, including potentially Department of Public Health, who we will talk about in a minute. Anything else on the legislative session? Otherwise, thank you to Mohit for making the time for this and the questions. And again, this really is a lot of changes, some of which I think will take some time to unfold, but are pretty momentous for the ability to use data effectively in the state. So we're grateful to the Governor's Office for leadership on this, and for making the time for it. And if there's follow-up questions or anything, we'll send the slides out with the references, and folks can read through and dig into the 837 pages of the implementer as you wish.
It got a little bit shorter after the amendments.
Is that true? Okay, all right.
They haven't posted the public act yet, though, so I can't tell you the new page number, but it should be shorter. So everyone should just wait. Just wait. It'll save you 20 pages before reading.
All right, let's see. We have system updates as the next topic on the agenda, and I think we'll just try and go through these fairly quickly so we can get to the remainder of this. I'll bring up again, kind of in Katie's absence, the data request calendar for the year. So this, I think, is largely unchanged since the last data governing board meeting, but this is a time, if there's an update on any of the requests, or if anyone knows a new request that you anticipate coming forward, let me know and we will add it to the calendar. This is kind of our effort to be able to keep track of where things are at a very high level, and so we can sort of plan for time and system capacity. The one update that kind of Katie has to convey is that there's a request for measuring the impact of pre-K programs in New Haven, which would involve data from early childhood, K-12, and Department of Labor. And then either we are in the midst of or already have set up sort of a meeting to go through the data sharing agreement for that. But we have, I believe, the sort of main questions on the request laid out pretty clearly, and just need to review the agreement to resolve any outstanding questions. Anything else that folks know about that should be added to adjusted in the calendar here? All right. Then I will also give two brief-ish updates on planning groups that we have kind of running with P20 Win, but outside the data governing board and the standard governance structure. So we have, I think as folks know, because we discussed at the last data governing board meeting, we had a technical upgrade planning group running in parallel for the last 6 months that had folks from some P20 Win agencies, plus additional outside help from DSBES, the state IT agency, Office of Health Strategy, and some others to look at the technical infrastructure for P20 Win, make recommendations about what we would need to do, if anything, to accelerate and expand system capacity. We had our last sort of formal meeting of that group yesterday, and I think we expect to produce a set of draft recommendations to come back to this group in at the July 30th meeting. So between now and the next meeting, we'll work on those and probably circulate some things for comments and review with folks. And I think at the July 30th meeting, you should expect to see and have something on the agenda about that. And then the other one, this is also partly a reminder to myself, at the executive board meeting in May, we agreed to set up a sort of side informal group to discuss system sustainability, review potential funding sources for P20 Win, present and future, to just make sure we've got a solid financial footing to continue the work that we're doing. And several people expressed interest in that. So I will later today set up a meeting time sometime in July, August to go through that, and we'll share some resources from sort of other places that have looked at the landscape of how efforts like P20 Win are funded around the country. So those of you that express interest in it, you'll get a meeting request sometime, or doodle poll, something like that, sometime later today about that set of meetings in the next month and a half. And if there's additional folks that have questions about either of these two, please let me know either in the chat or offline. And then I know we had an update on the Workforce Data Quality Initiative grant. I don't know, Patrick, if I can get you to deliver this, otherwise I will happily communicate it.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we did not get the grant, and I got an email yesterday afternoon with from ETA about giving us the reasons. I have, quite frankly, have not even opened that email yet, so I have no idea what it says. But I guess what I would say though is that we saw an opportunity. We put in an application. Hope other agencies will be thinking about doing the same type of thing. We saw, obviously, the SLDS grant was a grant that Department of Education was able to apply for. We applied for this one because it's Labor Department was eligible to apply for it, and you know, perhaps there are other agencies that have access to other types of grants or funding that would be appropriate to help with P20 Win sustainability. We will continue to shake all the trees we can to find funding to help with this, you know, obviously extremely important endeavor that the state is on and that we're very proud to be part of. And just somewhat related to sustainability, I guess, it's probably well known that we now have a new commissioner, and she is definitely a very energetic person and very much committed to the success of P20 Win. So, you know, we have a real ally. Not that our former commissioner wasn't an ally, he definitely was, but you know, right now we have a very strong ally in the commissioner's office here at Labor, and very excited about what the future holds for our agency, but also for what it means for P20 Win. And I know she will certainly be an advocate for P20 Win and for getting the resources that we need to sustain our work.
Thanks, Patrick. So unfortunately, not the best news for workforce data quality, but I think a good effort, and like Patrick saying, an example of the kind of thing that we need to be doing in order to kind of sustain and expand work. One other brief update. There was a request that Jen witnessed from CCIC circulated, and I don't know more, you may know more about this. There's a working group for SHIO, which is State Higher Ed something office. So there's, I think, an opportunity to pull together a working group on a topic that I have forgotten, but we'll email that around. If I don't know if it may already have circulated, or Janice that's circulated from CSU, or more if you know more from CCIC, but we'll circulate that. And I think if there's interest from folks, then that it may be a good fit for members of this group. And then I will segue to, oh, there's more slides. So the next item on the agenda is we are introducing a prospective new agency. And it's a good segue from Patrick's comments about having strong commissioner leadership. After the May executive board meeting, Commissioner Gifford from Department of Public Health reached out to Commissioner Bai, the board chair for our executive board, to inquire about participating in P20 Win, which is a great example of, I think, having the executive board sort of take leadership for the system. So since that time, we've had a couple of conversations with the wonderful people in the Department of Public Health, and we asked two of them to come here today to sort of do an introduction about the kind of work that DPH does, and just to sort of get questions from folks. Sort of the formal onboarding process for P20 Win really has, again, sort of we're in transition between the two different legal frameworks, but essentially involves the outreach to the executive board, review through data governing board, kind of a comment period, and then review of the legal agreements. And so we are working through those steps and have, you know, two folks from DPH here today to kind of just talk about the work that they do. And if folks from the P20 Win agencies have questions to DPH that you want to ask about, you know, the nature of what DPH does, or what might be involved if they were to participate. I think it is, again, it's a voluntary system, and so, but I think there was some enthusiasm from DPH leadership about investigating this, and so we have two folks from DPH here today. I'll briefly introduce, and then if you guys can both talk about yourselves a little bit to say who you are. We have Alinda Morales and Gary Orshambo from DPH. I will say that particularly, I spent a lot of the last year and a half working very closely with Gary as DPH has been on the front lines of the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So he's managed to peel away a little bit of time today for this meeting, but it's been in an entirely different context, just a great experience working with the wonderful people at DPH who have put in a tremendous amount of effort to help address in response to the pandemic in the last year and a half. So we're grateful for their time here today. And I don't know, Linda and Gary, if you can both introduce yourself and then just talk a little bit about what DPH does. I pulled together a slide based on the very detailed information that DPH has consistently provided about the data that it collects. And I can use that if you want, or you can sort of just kind of cover the work that DPH does.
Sure, that
off
would
the cuff as you wish. So,
So,
Okay, Gary, you can go first if you want to.
thank you. So thanks, Scott, for the kind words, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Gary Orshambo. I'm a senior epidemiologist here at DPH. I'm also the agency data officer. And as Scott has mentioned, over the past year and a half, I'm normally associated with our environmental health unit. But the past year and a half, I've been augmenting our infectious disease epidemiology folks and our immunization team to get all the data that we publish every day out the door into Scott's team's hands. So, and that has been an incredibly wonderful experience working with Scott and Pauline and Katie over those past 18 months. So DPH has an incredibly broad-based data catalog, and it includes what we are obviously most known for right now, which is COVID-19 surveillance data. But it is much deeper than just that. So we run the gamut between having registries of vital records, births and deaths. We have a regulatory component here at DPH. We inspect medical facilities. We do environmental inspections like for asbestos monitoring and public drinking water monitoring. Immunizations, we have a registry for primarily for childhood vaccinations that are required, but we are also able to use that to support the collection and storage of adult vaccinations, which we have done for COVID. We also license medical professionals and many other types of licenses that exist in the agency. Our environmental section is pretty wide-ranging activities, but probably more commonly known for its work with local health departments and districts around food and food facility inspections. And along with that, our disease outbreak identification, in which the goal there is to stop that spread of disease, whether it's a foodborne outbreak or an infectious disease outbreak. And we work and support in a collaborative manner our local health departments in this state. There are a lot of them. I think about 65 is the current number. The majority of our data sets are considered confidential. Things like birth records and disease surveillance data. But in addition to that, we have many data sets that are also highly sensitive. Things like HIV surveillance and sexually transmitted diseases. So, we take great care to protect that data. As such, we have also a large collection of state and federal regs and statutes that drive that data protection. And to ensure that we make that happen, we have a strong legal team that includes Attorney Alinda Morales to guide and assist us. So, Alinda, if you don't mind talking a little bit about that last part.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. My name is Olinda Morales. I'm one of the attorneys that work for the legal office at the Department of Public Health. My job is very broad, but when it comes to data, I am the HIPAA officer. I address all issues about questions regarding confidentiality at the state and federal level, HIPAA, of course. Anything about data exchange. I also advise the Department of Public Health Human Investigation Committee regarding the laws that apply to IRB. So I'm also I oversee FOIA. I forgot that part, which is a main part of my work nowadays. I also do hearings. I preside over cases in the regulatory aspect of the department that Gary just mentioned, and I advise some of the boards that we provide administrative services to, such as the medical board, dental commission, and so on. So every aspect of the department, it has to do with data, with health, disease surveillance. The department tries to decrease morbidity, mortality. We conduct a lot of morbidity, mortality studies. In the course of that work, we, of course, like Gary said, we collect a tremendous amount of data, including some of the data that I think you're interested in. So, and of course, all of the purpose of the department in general is to provide public health to everyone in the state. So, I have spent some time reading about what you guys do, and it's absolutely super interesting and innovative. So one of the questions that I have is, how does public health interact with with your purpose, with your objective. So I assume that you know, a lot of things in public do impact on health, impact on education, and of course impact on workforce. So that's my assumption, and I'm sure that's what I'm going to be hearing from you. So if you have any questions, just let me know, or Gary, and we will be happy to answer them.
Linda, could I get either you or Gary to talk about one thing, and then I see Mohit has a question too. Could you just talk about the HIC a little bit and what it is, because I think that some agencies have a similar structure, some do not, but you know, it's worth going through how you've done that already at DPH, because it's analogous in a lot of ways to how P20 functions.
Sure. Yes, the Human Investigation Committee, or HIC, is basically the department's IRB, and we review, because we have so much data, and some of the data, specifically the statutes, specifically require that the department shares the data for medical and scientific research. And actually, our biggest Connecticut statute that protects data is 19825, and also it allows us to share data for medical and scientific research. So the department has an IRB, or an HIC, which oversees the protocol, scientific protocol review. It is composed by 7 members. Some are from within the agency, some from the outside. Most of some of our epidemiologists are part of that. I'm also part of that. As the administrator and as the legal counsel to that committee. So basically what occurs there is that investigators submit a medical scientific protocol to the department for review, and they request certain data. They usually are very specific about what data dictionary they're seeking. So we review, we do a merits review and also a legal review based on federal law, federal IRB law. So that's how it goes. I have to say, I actually reviewed your procedure before I met with Scott on Wednesday, and it's kind of similar to what you guys do when there is a review of data request. It's similar, very similar, as a matter of fact.
Mohit, you have your hand up.
Sure, great. Thanks for the presentation from DPH. I think it's very exciting to see DPH interested in entering into P20 WIN. You know, so my background is an economist with a focus on education and the labor economist, and so you know, there's 2 things that immediately jump out as being of high value from the DPH data sets that, if merged through P20 WIN with certain labor and educational data sets, you know, could provide some real value to researchers in the state and help influence state policy. And so one, for example, is the birth record and birth weights, and merging birth weights with K-12 ed site data. That is something several states have done at this point. Florida had a very exciting paper that came out earlier this year on using birth weight as a control for like I guess health, right? And then seeing whether or not students from racial minority groups were over or under-identified into special education programs in their state. You know, controlling for birth weight, and birth weight turned out to be the best way to control for underlying health issues that were otherwise unobservable by the researcher. And the research findings there were really interesting. And it went both ways. There's both under and over identification depending on the district. And the other thing here is occupational records. And so the governor's office put forward and got passed some legislation around occupational licensing reform. And you know, one thing we would love to watch is, you know, as your agency is in charge of a big set of those occupational licenses, to make sure that we are able to actually assess any outcomes from the legislation there's on this to pass this year. So putting those 2 use cases on the board, and I think both of those are you know, really core to the work of P20.
Yeah, thanks, Mohit. The interesting thing about occupational health surveillance, that project is actually done collaboratively with Department of Labor. They receive the same data we do, basically.
Just to clarify, when I say occupational, I mean occupational licensing. So whether you're a medical professional or nurse or et cetera, as opposed to, I think what you mentioned was OSHA kind of work. I'm sure there's work to be done there, but I just wanted to highlight the occupational licensing side of the house.
Yeah, and Mahida, I think that you mentioned that the new implementer bill has some addresses FOIA, how FOIA. So we would be very interested in to know how FOIA will be handled. What are the logistics about when you receive a FOIA request at your agency from, let's say, from DPH data that you have in your possession at the moment, how would that be handled? So those things are crucial to the department.
Those are great questions. The FOIA exemptions that were added in Section 305 of the implementer are narrowly tailored to the new data sets that are being collected in the implementer. So that wouldn't apply necessarily. I think it is perfectly reasonable to read that language and try to get something similar on the books for other agencies, or maybe even for P20 WIN more generally. I think that is a perfectly reasonable ask. And so that's something we can certainly follow up on, offline and maybe look at in the next session.
Okay.
And I'm sure Scott has more information on just general FOI and how that's intersected with P20 WIN before, and whether that's been an issue that you had to work through before.
Robust topic for discussion. I wanted to see, Linda had asked if there's examples where other agencies would anticipate, the need to link with or match with DPH data. I pulled up sort of a rough list of some of the DPH data that I think hopefully generally reflects kind of what Gary had gone through a few minutes ago. So it would be good to, if there's other ideas or examples, we can pull some examples from what other states have done, but I'm curious if anyone else on the call. And I think particularly, again, as P20 is expanding, so we're adding in, we have Susan from DSS and Trina from DCF on the call, who I think have more work that is probably directly related to public health within their agency purviews. But I'd be curious if other folks had suggestions or questions that you want to ask the DPH team about the data they collect and ways in which your agency might be able to link with their data.
Hi, Scott. This is Kathy Marioni, Department of Labor.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There you are, Kathy.
Hi, sorry. If I may, I just want to raise one issue I see on your list here that I'm exploring in another capacity, and that's the effects of long-term COVID, particularly on unemployment going forward. There are indicators that this is an issue, and I have a disability grant that we're managing where we're working with UConn Health Center, and we've had conversations about what they're seeing. So I just want to toss that out there. I see that because I do see it on the list.
Whoever's speaking is muted.
I think I don't hear anyone yet. If so, I don't know if anyone else. I have suggestions, but are there anyone else have suggestions or questions for DPH? And again, I think this came about I think fairly quickly since the last meeting, the last executive board meeting, and so we appreciate kind of Linda and Gary making time for today. But this will probably be. I think this is a good introductory discussion. We can have some follow up after. Ajit, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks, Scott. Just had a question about the school-based health centers. What exactly is the data there?
Yeah, that I'd actually have to go take a look at the details, and I can get back to you on that.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, you're welcome, Ajit.
Anything else? I know one of the things, I'll just flag something that Mohit had mentioned earlier about the sort of expansive view that is the sort of now statutory purpose or vision for P20 WIN. And one of the examples he cited was 2Gen approaches. And so one thing they've done in other states is use birth records to construct sort of household or family structure. So right now, the way P20 and most systems work is they link individual to individual. But some states have tried to make intergenerational linkages to look at sort of two-gen or multi-generational approaches. And the birth records are really the backbone that they've used for that in other states, because that's the best way that you know about when young children are born in a state. And so I think that's an example that some other states have looked at vital records as a way to construct sort of multi-generational linkages. Unless, Ajit, do you have your hand up again, or is this the same hand? The
Same hand, sorry.
same hand. No, okay, that's fine. So given that we're basically at time, I'm going to thank Alinda, Gary, Mohit for making guest appearances today with the Data Governing Board. We very much appreciate the time from all of you. I think it's great to see the changes in the legislative session. It's really wonderful to be able to have the discussion with DPH about this. We'll sort of see what transpires as they dig a little more into the documentation, and we go through some of the questions that they'll have about what it entails to get involved with the system. But thank everyone for making the time for today. The remaining item I had on the agenda was the Resident Advisory Board, which is just a brief update from Katie that I think anyone that has expressed interest in participating in the working group on this, which also has a report out in August at the executive board meeting, she's been in touch with everybody that's expressed interest, I believe. So if you are interested in, being part of a discussion about setting up the Resident Advisory Board, and you have not been contacted by Katie, please let her or me know, and we'll get in touch. But that is working group that has a fairly tight turnaround to get things reported out by the August board meeting. And again, I think she's been in touch with everybody so far. Other than that, that is, I think, the conclusion of our agenda. Any other topics? Otherwise, we'll adjourn for today. Anything else from anyone before I close out? All right. Thank you, everyone, for making time today. And again, especially to Linda, Gary, and Mohit for making the extra time for this. And have a great holiday weekend. And we'll see everyone at minimum in a month, if not sooner.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.
Report.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.